Hello, everybody. This chapter we are covering Presenting Your Speech Online, Chapter 19. So the online environment, as you present speeches, which obviously has become much more common, we have to consider that there are elements of the internet that influence online speech, the setting, the obvious requirement for, recording software, things along those lines, a lot more beyond what you would see in an in-person speech taking place. Right here, obviously, we can consider the fact that it includes a remote audience. It has the factors of technology. There are different forms of interference. We can't predict when somebody next door is going to decide to mow their lawn, and there's so much more. Internet can drop, who knows? So it's good to think about those additional chances of interference and how you have to adapt. So the special nature of online environment is one where there is a distinct relationship with the audience. It's different than what you experience when you are face-to-face with your audience. So you need to think about how you can adjust appropriately to still capture that audience and still get your message across. So there are different dimensions of speech communication and that speech communication process that are going to take place inherently within an online speech. There are different kinds of online speeches, and you may or may not have already been exposed to these multiple types. There are the recorded online speeches where you will film in advance, upload a video, and there's the real-time speeches that take place on Zoom or Google Meets or what have you. When you're recording an online speech, it's obviously delivered and recorded and then uploaded to the internet, shared with the recipients. In the case of most online classes, you're looking at YouTube or a discussion forum. These are usually used in a blended course where you're maybe meeting once or twice a month, but then otherwise working at home on your coursework, or with those specifically online courses. It's still similar to an in-class speech, so you have to think of it that way in terms of designing it, delivering it, etc. An example here of a recorded online speech would be a TED Talk. Real-time online speeches are delivered with some particular type of software that you utilize, like I said, Teams, Google Meet, Zoom, whatever it happens to be. And that's going to be a remote audience that is actually gathered at a specific time for live viewing. So you're in front of them in terms of sitting in front of your webcam. An example here, this has become very, very common, is an online job interview. People are definitely using that more often than in-person interviews now. In terms of some guidelines for online speaking, you want to make sure that you control the visual environment that you're presenting. So think about where you're sitting, what might people hear, things along those lines. You're going to need to adapt your nonverbal communication because people won't be able to see much more than just, shoulders up. So gestures aren't going to be as obvious, and some of your vocalics, your voice, that won't necessarily be captured as well. You also want to think about adjusting your pacing because online people tend to lose their attention a little bit faster. So you need to move through faster than you would in person. But first and foremost, you still need to remember your audience. You still have an audience, whoever that may be. Even if it is a recorded speech, someone is watching it. So you need to keep in mind that you're delivering that speech to an audience. And you still need to practice. And this was probably actually easier than in person because you can recreate that environment of delivering a speech online much easier than in person. So some of this I already touched on a little bit, but the visual environment is the on-screen elements that your audience can see as you're presenting your online speech. What's behind you? What do they hear, etc. Some of the specific elements of the visual environment are the setting. So what is in your background? What are they actually able to see? The lighting. How bright or dark is a room? How can you make sure that you optimize the lighting so that people are able to see your facial expressions, that it doesn't look too dark or too bright? How do you frame yourself in the camera view, which we're going to talk about in a second, we'll come back to? How's the best way to make eye contact? Because you're looking at a camera and a screen. And then also personal appearance. Even though you're not in person, you still need to represent yourself in the best way possible. So you still are considering how you appear on screen. Framing. So, oh goodness, my apologies. Skipped forward. You see, visual environment. Perfect example how you can screw that up. Effective framing. So how does your face look on screen? Here are some examples of ineffective ways where you're too close to the camera. You've got, I'm sure you guys have seen this happen before. Somebody's just way too close to their webcam and it's just their face just completely dominates the screen. You don't want that. You also don't want to be so far back that you are minimized. You want your face, however you're representing yourself, in this case, the effective version, from about chest up, you want to be centered. So just the way you would take a picture if you were trying to take a yearbook picture or a photo ID, that kind of thing. You want yourself to be framed properly so that you're the focal point, but it's not overbearing, etc. Effective eye contact. This is a tricky one because you can't look at your screen. If you're trying to make eye contact so that people actually think that you're looking at them, you have to look at your webcam, which is usually along the top of your screen, whether it's a built-in webcam or a monitor mounted one that's even higher. You're going to have to look above, which can be a little disconcerting since you're also going to end up seeing kind of in your periphery your face and everyone else's faces if you're in one of those real-time meetings in your screen. So you have to be able to avoid that tendency to look down. You need to maintain the eye contact with your webcam. So you need to work on that to make sure that you're actually making eye contact rather than looking too far above or looking too far below. Controlling your visual environment, as I mentioned, is another important aspect. We see this ineffective example where there's a lot of stuff going on in the background. Natural light, granted, is a good thing, but who knows, there could be sun that suddenly comes out and then we can no longer see that person's face. All of these things can have a negative influence on that visual environment. So you typically want to find a well-lit room with a solid background wall, preferably a lighter color like white, etc. Another option is to utilize the background features in Teams or Google Meet or whatever, where you can do a kind of a stock photo or like a blur in the background, so that the background, it's sort of like you're on a green screen. It just clips your face and your body out. And then in the background, it could be a solid wall or something very unassuming so that you're not distracting your audience. So those are a couple of different options. You're going to need to adapt your nonverbal communications. You're going to have to work intentionally toward using well-planned and deliberate gestures, because again, people can't see your whole body when you're on camera. So you're going to have to maybe sometimes awkwardly bring your hands up closer to your face, or really focus on some of those verbal gestures, excuse me, facial gestures that you're utilizing, since you can't use your hands and your body as much. And then you also want to be sure to use controlled and confident eye movement as you are interacting with essentially a web camera. So you can't stare ominously the entire time. So you will need to have a little bit of those controlled eye movements so that it still seems natural. You're also going to need to adjust your pacing, which I alluded to earlier. And you can do this in one way by altering what actually appears on the screen, by occasionally using visual aids. So if you have a PowerPoint presentation or some pictures that you're going to be using, you can help keep the audience's attention by using some of those slides, but you don't want to overdo it because that can be a distraction. So that can help in terms of pacing things out. And as I had mentioned earlier, you're going to want to speak a little more briskly, a little faster in terms of your tempo when you're providing online content, because it's just kind of natural. The way that we are as a society, we're used to very fast-paced input when it comes to online technology or watching television, that sort of things. Things move at a much faster pace. So you kind of have to work towards adjusting to that. You still need to remember your audience. You're still going to have to try to adapt effectively to a remote audience. Obviously, you're not getting that amount of feedback that you would if you were in person, but you need to try to anticipate how an audience may react as they're watching your speech, and sort of get ready for that, and provide some of those, fail safes in the event that you think maybe that might not work, or you're going to need to do something a little different to change pace, what have you. And then kind of along the same lines, engage in a mental dialogue, that anticipation of the questions that your audience might have that they're not going to be able to ask, or that they can't sort of suggest to you through that nonverbal communication that takes place in person. And that just remember that even though you're sitting in front of a screen, you're still public speaking. You're engaging in an act of public speaking, the public being the important part. You're still being viewed. You're still being listened to. You are not a lone island. This is something that other people are seeing. And so you want to remember that there's more to it than just that screen, that camera, and you, that it is something that's being put out there to be shared by the general public, or maybe not general public, but those who you choose to be included. When you're practicing recorded speeches, great opportunity, because it's so easy. You can totally prepare in the same environment that you're going to be actually delivering the speeches, because you can record them in advance. And you can actually see and gauge what the audience is going to see, and then you can adapt. So record it and watch it and say, wow, if I was turning that in, I would definitely not do that. Or, wow, that was great. I should really make sure that I capitalize on that, because that works. So record those speeches, review those, and then even if it takes maybe a few passes at it before you actually submit, look at them and improve, because you can do it as many times as you want before you have to turn it in. One thing I will say is, please never, ever, ever, ever submit a speech that has been edited. There are a lot of issues that can happen with that. Like sometimes I see the video and the audio not linking, or it just really, it draws attention to the fact that you've edited something out. And so it's like, wow, what did they mess up there? What just happened? So don't edit, just don't do it. We know mistakes are made, just push through and don't worry about it. Unless, of course, it's a disastrous failure, then just start over, try again, but don't edit them. It's always obvious. So just try again, or just keep pushing through. When you're practicing real-time speeches, you can do the same thing. You can still practice with your computer using the software that you plan on using to record those speeches. Use the screen recording function so that you can actually just have it automatically download for you to watch. And then bingo, bango, you're all set. You have a practice speech that you can review and then improve on. And then in advance, if you are doing those real-time speeches, you also want to make sure that you're accessing whatever software you're using in advance, especially if you haven't used it in some time, just to make sure that you have that software fully updated, that you know how to use it, that it works with your operating system, because there's nothing worse than, 10 minutes before a job interview, you're logging in and you can't gain access because you have the wrong OS or the software needs to be upgraded. So just practice with that, or I should say, test that in advance to be sure that you're ready for the actual speech, interview, what have you. In terms of the technology that you use, it's going to be up to you what you're most comfortable with. And sometimes that's dictated also by the company that you work for. But you want to think about your options and make sure that the software that you do choose is going to work for whatever speech you're giving, whatever audience or occasion it happens to be, and adapt accordingly. And then adhere to any master software program that you have to follow. Kind of like I said, anything that you are required to utilize by whatever company you work for or whatever company you're interviewing for, that sort of thing. And have a backup plan, because even when we prepare to the nth degree, things can still happen. There can be a power outage and you don't have internet available. So a few things that you can do in those types of emergency situations: you could distribute your speech outline in advance, share that with people so they get a sense of what you planned on talking about. You could try to move to a conference call in person if it's possible. You could just try to share your document, your outline, your whatever, through some type of document collaboration program, whether it be a Google Doc or a Teams platform style thing. You could just try to move it to a recorded format. So maybe you can't get on the software itself. You could record it on your computer and then share that video through YouTube or as an attachment in an email. And then, of course, discuss any possibilities to reschedule if that's what it means as well. So yeah, just be ready to be flexible, because things do happen. And fortunately, now that we've all been in this environment for some time, we realize that that does happen. So I think people are a lot more forgiving of things that might pop up unexpectedly. So I am not going to have you guys watch this speech in this particular presentation, but it is in the PowerPoint available on Moodle. So by all means, take a peek, see how it looks in terms of a sample online delivery speech, and it never hurts to watch. So with that, that is all I have for this particular chapter, and I hope you guys have a great day. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.